The static crackle of an old film reel begins. A grainy, sepia-toned image slowly fades in. Welcome to Shadow Frames, where forgotten images reveal their darkest secrets. Today's photograph was discovered last month in the basement of the Criterion Theatre in London. Dated June 18, 1907. 8 actors posed on stage after their final dress rehearsal. But look closer at the lead actor's mask. This is the story of photographer Thomas Blackwood, and the night he captured something that was never meant to be seen. London, spring of 1907, a time when electric lights were replacing gas lamps, and the theater was still the crown jewel of entertainment. Thomas Blackwood was 32, a struggling photographer who specialized in theatrical portraiture, a man desperate for recognition in a city teeming with artistic talent. On the morning of June 17th, Blackwood received a telegram that would change his life forever. Telegram for Mr. Blackwood. The message was brief but would prove fateful. Require photographer for production documentation. Criterion Theatre, June 18th, 8 o'clock sharp. Payment substantial. Discretion essential. Signed, M. Thomas had been struggling to pay his rent. His photography studio on Fleet Street had seen better days. The plaster was cracking, the equipment outdated. But Thomas had an eye, everyone said so. An eye for capturing something beyond the mere appearance of his subjects. Something essential. The Criterion was one of London's most prestigious theaters, a venue Thomas had only dreamed of accessing. Yet the telegram was curious. Most theatrical photography was publicized, not kept discreet. Still, who was he to question good fortune? Another day without customers, Tom? Charlotte Weber was Thomas's assistant, a German immigrant with a keen intellect and steady hands, perfect for the delicate work of developing photographs. At 26, she had come to London to escape the constraints of her family in Berlin, finding unexpected freedom in the darkroom's red glow. Not anymore, Lottie. Look at this. The Criterion. Tom, that's wonderful. But what's this about discretion? I haven't the faintest. Perhaps it's a new production they want to keep under wraps. Competition among the theaters is fierce these days. When do you go? Tomorrow night, 8 o'clock. Shall I come along to assist? Better not. The telegram specifically mentioned discretion. I'll manage the equipment myself. That night, Thomas could barely sleep. The promise of the Criterion assignment filled his mind with possibilities. Perhaps this was the opportunity he had been waiting for, the chance to elevate his name from the ranks of common photographers to something more distinguished. As morning light filtered through his curtains, Thomas rose and began preparing his equipment with meticulous care. His Thornton-Pickard Royal Ruby camera was his most prized possession, inherited from his father, who had been a landscape photographer of some renown. The brass fittings gleamed as he polished them, checking each mechanism with practiced precision. By late afternoon, his preparations were complete. He loaded his glass plates, carefully wrapped his camera, and gathered his tripod and flash powder. The summer sun was still high when he hailed a hansom cab to take him across London to the Criterion. Piccadilly Circus, please. The Criterion Theatre. The theatre stood proudly at the southwest corner of Piccadilly Circus, its Renaissance-style facade gleaming in the evening light. Thomas paid the driver and stood for a moment, admiring the grandeur of the building. The main entrance was busy with theater-goers attending the evening performance, but Thomas knew from the telegram that he was expected at the stage door. He made his way around to the back of the theater, where a narrow alley led to an unassuming door. A gas lamp flickered overhead, casting shifting shadows across the brickwork. Thomas checked his pocket watch. 7:55. He was early. Setting down his equipment, he straightened his collar and knocked on the door. After a moment, the door creaked open. A thin man with hollow cheeks and sharp eyes peered out at him. His black suit hung loosely on his frame, as though he had recently lost weight. Yes? Thomas Blackwood. I'm the photographer. I was told to come at 8. The man studied him for a long moment, then nodded and stepped aside. They're expecting you. Follow me. The backstage area was a labyrinth of narrow corridors and small rooms. The air was thick with the scent of grease paint, sawdust, and the lingering aroma of tobacco. As they walked, Thomas noticed how quiet it was. Unusually quiet for a theater, especially one with a performance supposedly in progress. Is there no show tonight? Not for the public. The cryptic response sent a small shiver down Thomas's spine, but he attributed it to the natural theatrical flair for the dramatic. They continued deeper into the building, descending a narrow staircase that Thomas presumed led to the understage area. The stagehand stopped at a heavy door, and produced a key from his pocket. They're rehearsing in the secondary performance space, an experimental production, very exclusive. As the door swung open, Thomas was surprised to see a fully equipped smaller theater. Unlike the main stage above, this space was intimate, with perhaps 50 seats arranged in a semicircle. The stage itself was simple but elegant, lit by electric lights that gave everything a harsh, unforgiving brilliance. The stagehand gestured toward the front row. "Wait there. The director will speak with you shortly." Left alone, Thomas began setting up his equipment. The theater was eerily silent, the only sound the click and snap of his camera being assembled. He had just finished mounting it on the tripod when a voice spoke from the shadows beside the stage. "Mr. Blackwood, thank you for coming on such short notice." A tall figure emerged into the light. He was impeccably dressed in an evening suit of the latest fashion, his dark hair swept back from a high forehead. His eyes were unusual, one blue, one brown, giving him a disconcerting gaze. "It's my pleasure, Mr. Marcus, just Marcus. I am the director of tonight's performance." Thomas noticed how Marcus hesitated slightly before the word performance, as though searching for the right term. "We are preparing a very special production, Mr. Blackwood, one that will only be performed once, for a very select audience. I require photographs that capture its essence." "I understand. Will I be photographing during the performance or?" "No. You will take a series of portraits. The performers in costume, both individually and as a company. The final dress rehearsal concludes at midnight. You will take your photographs then." "Midnight? That's rather late for—" "The payment will be £50. Thomas fell silent. £50 was an extraordinary sum, more than he would typically earn in 3 months. "I take it that resolves any concerns about the hour?" "Yes, of course. I'll need to set up proper lighting for the portraits. Everything has been arranged. You will use the stage lighting. I want these photographs to capture the authenticity of our production." There was something in Marcus's manner that unsettled Thomas, a controlled intensity that seemed at odds with the typical theatrical director's flamboyance. "You are not to speak with the performers. They are deep in character and must not be disturbed. You will observe the final rehearsal from here to understand the essence of what you are to capture." "I see. And what is the production?" "We call it The Immortal Mask, an adaptation of ancient myths into modern form." Before Thomas could ask more questions, Marcus turned toward the stage and clapped his hands sharply 3 times. "Places for the final rehearsal." The lights in the theater dimmed, leaving only the stage illuminated. Thomas settled into his seat, notebook in hand, to make observations that would inform his photographic choices later. From the wings emerged 7 figures, each moving with a strange, gliding precision. They wore elaborate costumes that seemed to blend historical periods: Elizabethan ruffs with Victorian silhouettes, Renaissance doublets paired with modern evening wear. But most striking were their masks. Each mask was unique, crafted with extraordinary detail. Some resembled animals, others human faces frozen in exaggerated expressions of emotion. They covered the entire face, with only the performer's eyes visible through narrow slits. The 7 arranged themselves in a semicircle, moving with the coordinated precision of long practice. And then the 8th performer entered. Unlike the others, this figure moved with a fluid grace that seemed almost inhuman. Taller than the rest, dressed entirely in black save for crimson gloves, the lead actor wore a mask unlike anything Thomas had ever seen. It was bone white, with delicate features that somehow suggested both masculine and feminine aspects simultaneously. The lips were painted a deep red, curled in the faintest suggestion of a smile. But it was the eyes of the mask that transfixed Thomas. Unlike the others, this mask had no slits. Where the eyes should have been, there were only smooth, blank surfaces. Yet somehow, Thomas had the unnerving sensation that the actor could see perfectly well. What followed was like no theatrical production Thomas had ever witnessed. There was no dialogue, only movement and music provided by a single violinist hidden in the orchestra pit. The performers enacted what appeared to be an ancient ritual, their gestures precise and loaded with meaning that Thomas couldn't decipher. The lead actor was mesmerizing, commanding the stage with subtle movements that somehow conveyed more emotion than the most passionate soliloquy. Throughout the performance, Thomas found his attention continually drawn back to that white mask with its unseeing eyes. As the rehearsal progressed, Thomas began to notice something odd. The movements of the performers were becoming more fluid, more perfect with each repetition of what appeared to be a cyclical performance. and the lead actor's movements had a quality that was increasingly inhuman. At precisely midnight, the performance reached its climax. The 7 masked figures formed a circle around the lead, who stood perfectly still at the center. Slowly, with ritual precision, the lead actor raised his gloved hands to his mask. For one terrible moment, Thomas thought the actor was going to remove the mask, but instead, those crimson-gloved hands merely caressed its surface, as one might touch a lover's face. And then, in perfect unison, all 8 performers turned to face the empty theater. Though Thomas knew it was impossible, he could have sworn that the blank eyes of the lead actor's mask were fixed directly on him. End scene. The lights rose slightly. Marcus turned to Thomas, that unsettling dual-colored gaze assessing him. "Now you understand what you are to capture, Mr. Blackwood." Thomas realized he had been holding his breath. He exhaled slowly, trying to collect his thoughts. What he had witnessed wasn't theater as he understood it. It was something else entirely. Something that stirred primitive fears he couldn't articulate. "Yes, I believe I do." "Good. You will take a group portrait first, then individual studies of each performer, ending with our lead. They will remain in character throughout. Remember, not a word to any of them." Thomas nodded, grateful for the familiar routine of preparing his equipment. He checked his flash powder, adjusted his camera, and positioned himself at the center of the small theater. The performers arranged themselves on stage according to Marcus's quiet directions. 8 figures, 8 masks, standing in a perfect semicircle. Thomas positioned his camera, then paused, frowning. "The lighting is unusual. I'm not certain if the lighting stays as it is." "Proceed, Mr. Blackwood." Thomas ducked under the black cloth to compose his shot. Through the ground glass viewfinder, the image was transformed, the 8 figures appearing more like specters than actors. He made his adjustments, then emerged. "Please remain perfectly still." The flash momentarily illuminated the theater in harsh white light. Thomas blinked away the afterimage, already preparing for the next plate. One by one, he photographed the 7 supporting performers. Each stood alone at center stage, holding a pose that captured the essence of their character. Though Thomas was accustomed to the natural nervousness of portrait subjects, these performers remained unnaturally still, as though they were not breathing at all. Finally, only the lead remained. As the actor took position at center stage, Thomas felt a cold sensation in the pit of his stomach. Through his viewfinder, he could see that the mask appeared different somehow, the features more defined, the suggestion of a smile more pronounced. "This is our final shot, Mr. Blackwood. Make it count." Thomas's hands trembled slightly as he prepared the flash powder. Something was wrong, though he couldn't have said what exactly. The lead actor stood motionless, that blank-eyed mask seeming to stare directly into the camera, directly at Thomas. "Remain still, please." As the flash illuminated the stage, Thomas could have sworn he saw something behind the mask. Not a face, but something else, something that should not have been there. But the impression lasted only a moment, gone with the fading of the flash. "Excellent. That concludes our business, Mr. Blackwood." The performers had already vanished backstage without a sound. Thomas began packing his equipment, eager now to be away from the Criterion's strange underground theater. "When will the photographs be ready?" "I can have them for you by tomorrow evening." "Perfect. You will deliver them here, same time tomorrow. Your payment will be waiting." Marcus reached into his jacket and produced an envelope. A deposit of £10, the remainder upon delivery. As Thomas accepted the envelope, his fingers brushed against Marcus's hand. The man's skin was unnaturally cold. "Until tomorrow, Mr. Blackwood. The stagehand will show you out." The thin stagehand materialized from the shadows as though he had been there all along. In silence, he led Thomas back through the labyrinthine corridors and up to the stage door. Outside, the night air was cool against Thomas's face, heavy with the promise of rain. As he made his way home through the darkened streets, Thomas couldn't shake the sense of unease that had settled over him. The production he had witnessed defied categorization. Not quite theater, not quite dance, but something ritual and ancient. And that mask, with its blank eyes that somehow saw everything. It was past 2 in the morning when Thomas finally reached his studio. Despite the late hour, a light burned in the window. Charlotte was waiting for him. "Tom, I was beginning to worry. What are you doing here at this hour, Lottie?" "I couldn't sleep. Thought I might as well prepare the chemicals for developing." "How was the Criterion?" Thomas set down his equipment, considering how to describe what he had witnessed. "Strange, very strange. The production, if you can call it that, more like a ritual performed by 8 masked figures. No dialogue, no conventional narrative, Avant-garde theater is all the rage these days. Was it a public performance? No audience except me and the director. He called it the Immortal Mask. Charlotte helped Thomas unpack his equipment, her quick hands making light work of it. Did you get good shots? I believe so. We'll know when we develop them. Now? They're needed by tomorrow evening. We'd best start now. Though exhausted, Thomas knew he couldn't rest until he had seen the results of his work. Together, he and Charlotte entered the dark room at the back of the studio. The familiar scent of chemicals was oddly comforting after the strangeness of the evening. Under the red safe light, they began the meticulous process of developing the glass plate negatives. Thomas had always found a meditative quality in this work. The careful chemical baths, the gradual emergence of the image like a ghost materializing from nothing. Let's start with the group portrait. As the image slowly appeared on the plate, Charlotte leaned in closer. Those masks are extraordinary. Yes, they were quite distinctive, but as the image fully developed, Thomas frowned. Something wasn't right. What's wrong? The lead actor's mask. It looks different. In the photograph, the white mask of the lead performer appeared to have changed. The features were sharper, more defined than Thomas remembered, and where the eyes should have been blank, there now appeared to be narrow slits. Perhaps it's just the lighting. Perhaps. Unsettled, they continued with the individual portraits. Each developed perfectly, capturing the eerie stillness of the performers. But when they reached the final plate, the portrait of the lead actor, Thomas felt that same cold sensation in his stomach. As the image emerged from the chemical bath, Charlotte gasped, "Tom, the mask." The mask in the photograph was no longer blank-eyed. Instead, through the narrow slits, actual eyes were visible, human eyes, filled with an intelligence and malevolence that made Thomas's blood run cold. That's impossible. The mask had no eye holes. I'm certain of it. Then how do you explain this? Thomas had no answer. He stared at the photograph, trying to rationalize what he was seeing. Perhaps there had been eye holes, and he simply hadn't noticed them in the dim lighting of the theater. It must be a trick of the light. Or perhaps the performer shifted the mask between poses. What kind of experimental production did you say this was? The director called it the Immortal Mask, an adaptation of ancient myths, he said. Charlotte's expression changed, a shadow of recognition crossing her face. The Immortal Mask? Tom, that sounds like the Schattenspieler. The what? The Schattenspieler. The Shadow Players. It's an old German legend my grandmother used to frighten me with. A troupe of masked performers who appear once every 50 years to stage a special performance. What kind of performance? The kind that requires a sacrifice. Thomas laughed, though the sound held little humor. Come now, Lottie. Surely you don't believe in such superstitions. Of course not, but it's a strange coincidence, isn't it? 8 masked performers, a secret performance with no audience. Thomas looked again at the photograph of the lead actor. Those eyes behind the mask seemed to be looking directly at him, aware and calculating. It's nonsense. Just an experimental theater group with a flair for the dramatic. Then why request such secrecy? Why the midnight rehearsal in a hidden theater? Thomas had no good answer. He carefully set the photograph aside to dry. Whatever it is, I'm being paid £50 to document it. I'll deliver the photographs tomorrow evening and be done with it. I don't like it, Tom. There's something wrong about all of this. Thomas wished he could disagree with her, but the unease that had followed him from the criterion had only grown stronger. Let's finish the prints. I need to sleep. They worked in silence, creating perfect prints from each negative. By the time they finished, dawn was breaking over London, pale light filtering through the studio windows. You should rest. I'll clean up here. You're sure? Positive. Go home, Tom. You look exhausted. Thomas couldn't argue. He felt drained in a way that went beyond physical tiredness, as though the strange performance had somehow siphoned something essential from him. Thank you, Lottie. I'll return this afternoon to mount the photographs. As Thomas made his way to his modest lodgings in Bloomsbury, the streets of London were coming alive. Delivery carts rattled over cobblestones, shop owners raised their shutters, and factory workers hurried to their morning shifts. The ordinary rhythms of the city should have been reassuring, but Thomas found himself looking at each passing face with newfound suspicion. Who else might be wearing a mask of normalcy, concealing something other behind it? Thomas's rooms were cold and uninviting. He hadn't bothered to light the fire before leaving the previous day, and now the hearth stood empty and ash-filled. Too tired to remedy this, he simply collapsed onto his bed fully clothed, his last conscious thought fixed on the eyes behind that white mask. He dreamed of masks, dozens of them, hundreds floating in darkness. Each bore that same blank-eyed expression until, one by one, the eyes opened to reveal not human eyes, but something ancient and hungry behind them. Thomas awoke with a start. Someone was pounding on his door. Disoriented, he checked his pocket watch. 4 o'clock? I've slept the day away. Coming, coming. He opened the door to find Charlotte standing there, her face pale with worry. Tom, thank God you're all right. Of course I'm all right. What's happened? Charlotte pushed past him into the room, clutching a newspaper. It's the Criterion. There was a fire last night after you left. A fire? Was anyone hurt? That's just it. They found no bodies, but she handed him the newspaper. The headline read, Mystery at the Criterion. Fire destroys hidden theater. 8 persons missing. A fire of unknown origin broke out in a previously unknown performance space beneath the Criterion Theater early this morning. The space, which was not on any official plans of the building, appears to have been recently used. Investigators found evidence suggesting the presence of 8 individuals, but no bodies have been recovered. Thomas lowered the paper, his mind racing. This is impossible. I was there just hours before. There was the director, Marcus, and the stagehand, and the 8 performers. 9 people in total then? But the article only mentions 8 missing. Maybe Marcus escaped? Or wasn't counted among them? Tom, this is exactly like the legend of the Schattenspieler. They perform their ritual, claim their sacrifice, and then vanish, leaving no trace. That's ridiculous, Lottie. There must be a rational explanation. Then explain the photographs. Explain those eyes behind the mask. Thomas couldn't. He sank into a chair, the newspaper still clutched in his hands. The photographs. I need to deliver them tonight. You can't be serious. The theater burned down, Tom. There's no one to deliver them to. But what if Marcus survived? What if he's waiting for me? 50 pounds, Lottie. I need that money. It's not worth the risk. Something is very wrong about all of this. Thomas knew she was right, but the thought of abandoning the commission and the promised payment was difficult to accept. I should at least go to the Criterion, see the situation for myself. Not alone. I'm coming with you. Thomas wanted to refuse, to protect her from whatever strangeness was unfolding. But the truth was, he didn't want to face it alone either. Very well. But first, let's collect the photographs from the studio. The streets were crowded with the late afternoon bustle as they made their way to the studio. Once there, Thomas was relieved to find everything as they had left it. The photographs were dry, each a perfect capture of the strange masked performers. Look at them all together. Don't you see something odd? Thomas arranged the 8 individual portraits in a row, then stepped back. After a moment, he saw what Charlotte meant. In each successive photograph, the masks appeared subtly different, more defined, more alive. It must be a trick of the light, or a chemical peculiarity in the development process. You don't believe that any more than I do. Thomas carefully placed the photographs in a portfolio, then hesitated. The negatives. Perhaps we should take those too. Why? I'm not sure. Just a feeling. He collected the glass plate negatives, wrapping them carefully in cloth before placing them in a wooden box. As they prepared to leave, Charlotte paused at the door. Tom, whatever happens at the Criterion, be careful. There's something about these photographs that frightens me. Thomas nodded, his own apprehension growing with each passing moment. Together they hailed a cab to Piccadilly Circus. The Criterion was cordoned off with police tape, but the main damage appeared to be at the rear of the building. A small crowd of onlookers had gathered, watching as investigators came and went. Thomas approached one of the constables standing guard. Excuse me, officer. I'm Thomas Blackwood. I was in the theater last night taking photographs. The constable's expression sharpened with interest. Were you now? And what time would that have been, sir? From about 8 until shortly after midnight. I was commissioned to photograph a theatrical production in a performance space beneath the main theater. You'd better speak with Inspector Davies. He's inside. The constable escorted Thomas and Charlotte through the main entrance of the theater and down to where a group of officials were examining the charred remains of what had been the stage door. Inspector, this gentleman says he was in the underground theater last night, taking photographs. Inspector Davies was a solid man in his 50s, with shrewd eyes and a mustache going to gray. He assessed Thomas with a practiced gaze. Is that so? And who commissioned these photographs, Mr. Blackwood? Thomas Blackwood. I was hired by a man who called himself Marcus. No surname given. Describe him if you would. Thomas provided a detailed description of Marcus, the stagehand, and as much as he could recall of the masked performers. With each detail, the inspector's expression grew more troubled. Mr. Blackwood, the management of the Criterion Theater has no record of any Marcus among their staff. Moreover, they claim to have had no knowledge of any performance space beneath the main theater. That's absurd. I was there. I saw it with my own eyes. I don't doubt you, sir. We found the space, just as you described it, but according to the building plans, it shouldn't exist. It appears to have been constructed recently, and with considerable skill to have escaped notice. What about the fire? Do you know what caused it? The fire brigade's preliminary assessment suggests it was deliberately set. Multiple points of origin, accelerants used. Thomas felt a chill run through him. And the missing persons? The newspaper mentioned 8. We found evidence of recent occupation, costumes, makeup, personal effects, enough to suggest 8 individuals. But no bodies, despite the intensity of the fire. It's as if they simply vanished. I have the photographs I took. Would they be of use to your investigation? Most certainly. May I see them? Thomas opened his portfolio and carefully removed the prints. The inspector examined them one by one, his expression growing increasingly perplexed. These masks. They're unlike anything I've seen before. They were part of the production. The Immortal mask, it was called. At this, the inspector's head snapped up, his eyes widening slightly. What did you say? The Immortal mask. That's what Marcus called it. An adaptation of ancient myths, he said. Inspector Davies exchanged a significant look with one of his colleagues, then turned back to Thomas. Mr. Blackwood, are you aware that there have been 3 other incidents in London's history involving fires in theaters after performances called The Immortal Mask? What? No, I had no idea. The most recent was in 1857 at the Adelphi. Before that, 1807 at the Lyceum. And the first recorded instance was in 1757 at the Theatre Royal, Drury Lane. Every 50 years. I beg your pardon? Nothing. Just a coincidence. In each case, a mysterious production was staged for a private audience. In each case, a fire followed. And in each case, several individuals associated with the production were never seen again. Thomas felt as though the floor was tilting beneath his feet. This couldn't be happening. There had to be a rational explanation. Surely you don't believe there's some kind of pattern, some supernatural element? I believe in evidence, Mr. Blackwood. And the evidence suggests that someone is recreating historical events with remarkable attention to detail. These photographs may help us identify the individuals involved. But the masks, yes, the masks complicate things. But perhaps there are other identifying features. May I keep these for our investigation? Of course. I have the negatives as well if you'd like them. That would be most helpful. And I'll need a formal statement from you, detailing everything you observed last night. For the next hour, Thomas recounted his experience in painstaking detail, from the telegram to his departure from the theater. The only element he omitted was the strange change in the mask's eyes that had appeared in the photographs. That detail seemed too fantastical, too likely to undermine his credibility. Thank you, Mr. Blackwood. This has been most informative. I may need to speak with you again as our investigation progresses. Of course, whatever I can do to help. In the meantime, I'd advise you to be cautious. If this Marcus individual contacts you again, please inform me immediately. As they left the Criterion, the summer evening was drawing in, the gas lamps along Piccadilly beginning to glow in the gathering dusk. Neither Thomas nor Charlotte spoke until they were well away from the theater. Every 50 years, Tom. Just like the legend of the Schattenspieler. It's a coincidence, nothing more. Or perhaps a deliberate recreation of those historical incidents, as the inspector suggested. Then why go to such lengths? Why build a hidden theater, stage an elaborate production for no audience, then burn it all down? I don't know, Lottie, but I refuse to believe it's some supernatural troupe of immortal performers. What about the eyes in the photograph? How do you explain that? Thomas had no answer. They walked in silence back to the studio, each lost in their own thoughts. As they approached, Thomas noticed that the door was slightly ajar. Did you lock up when we left? Of course I did. I always do. Thomas moved cautiously toward the door, pushing it open wider. The studio beyond was dark, but he could sense immediately that something was wrong. Wait here. Tom, don't... But he was already stepping inside, fumbling for the gas lamp just inside the door. As the light flared, he gasped. My God. The studio had been ransacked. Equipment lay broken on the floor, chemicals spilled across workbenches, and photographic plates shattered. But worst of all were the walls. Every available surface had been covered with crude drawings of masks. Dozens of them, all variations of the bone-white mask worn by the lead actor. "Tom, what's happened?" She pushed past him into the studio, then stopped short at the sight of the devastation. "Who would do this?" "I think we both know who. The question is why." Thomas moved further into the studio, assessing the damage. His camera equipment had been systematically destroyed, rendering it useless. The darkroom door stood open, revealing similar destruction within. The photographs, the negatives. "We gave them to Inspector Davies, remember? They're safe." "Not all of them. I kept one back. The portrait of the lead actor." "What? Why would you do that?" "I don't know. A feeling. I hid it in the false bottom of the chemical cabinet." Thomas hurried to the cabinet, which had been upended but not completely destroyed. The hidden compartment Charlotte had mentioned remained intact, and inside was the photograph she had concealed. "It's still here." He withdrew the photograph carefully. The white mask seemed even more alive now, the eyes behind it more malevolent. "We should destroy it, Tom. Whatever is happening, this photograph is at the center of it." "No, it's evidence. We need to take it to Inspector Davies." "Not tonight. It's getting late, and after this, I don't think we should be out after dark." Thomas couldn't argue with her logic. There was something deeply unsettling about the vandalism, not just the destruction, but the obsessive rendering of that mask on every wall. "You're right. We'll go to Scotland Yard first thing in the morning. But what about tonight? This place isn't secure anymore. You can stay at my lodgings. Mrs. Finch won't mind, given the circumstances." Thomas nodded gratefully. The thought of returning to his lonely rooms, with the memory of those mask drawings fresh in his mind, was deeply unappealing. "Thank you, Lottie. Let me just gather a few things that weren't destroyed." He carefully tucked the photograph into his inside pocket, then collected what little remained of value, a few personal items, some papers related to the business. As they prepared to leave, Charlotte paused in the doorway. "Tom, look at this." She was pointing to one of the mask drawings, larger than the others, and positioned directly opposite the door. Unlike the others, this one had words scrawled beneath it. "The mask hungers." "What does that mean?" "I don't know, but I don't want to stay here to find out." They hurried through the darkening streets of London, both jumping at shadows. By the time they reached Charlotte's lodging house in Bloomsbury, night had fully fallen. Mrs. Finch, the landlady, was sympathetic to their plight, though Thomas suspected she had drawn her own conclusions about the nature of their relationship. "Of course he can stay, Miss Weber. What a dreadful business. Vandals and hooligans everywhere these days. I'll make up the spare room." Once they were settled in Charlotte's small sitting room, a fire crackling in the grate and tea steaming in their cups, Thomas felt some of the tension ease from his shoulders. "What do we do now?" "Tomorrow we take the photograph to Inspector Davies. After that, I suppose I'll need to find new premises. Start rebuilding the business. Tom, I don't think it's over. Whoever did this, whatever did this, it wanted something. The photographs, most likely. But why? They're just photographs of people in masks. Unusual, yes, but hardly worth destroying a studio over. Unless they're not just photographs. Unless they've captured something that wasn't meant to be seen." Thomas withdrew the photograph from his pocket, studying it in the firelight. The white mask seemed to glow against the dark background, those eyes staring out with an intelligence that no mere image should possess. The mask hungers. What could that possibly mean? In the Schattenspieler legend, the masks were said to be vessels, empty shells waiting to be filled. Filled with what? Souls. Thomas nearly laughed, but something in Charlotte's expression stopped him. She was deadly serious. The legend says they harvest souls every 50 years. That's why they need the performance, the ritual. It's a trap, but I escaped. I left the theater. Did you? Or did they let you go knowing you'd create a perfect record of their existence? A photograph contains a fragment of its subject, Tom. That's what some cultures believe. A capture of essence. Thomas looked again at the photograph, suddenly reluctant to touch it. The idea was absurd, of course. Pure superstition. And yet, even if that were true, what would be the purpose? Propagation. Spreading their influence beyond the confines of their ritual. Through the photographs, they can be seen by many more eyes than those present at the performance. That's... He was interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. They both froze, eyes locked in sudden fear. "Miss Weber? There's a gentleman here to see Mr. Blackwood." "Who is it, Mrs. Finch?" "He says his name is Marcus. Says it's most urgent." Thomas felt the blood drain from his face. It was impossible. The theater had burned. Marcus should be dead, or at the very least fleeing from the police investigation. Don't open the door. He can't come in unless invited. That's part of the legend. This is madness, Lottie. But he made no move toward the door. Instead, he called out, "Tell him I'm not available, Mrs. Finch. I'll speak with him tomorrow at Scotland Yard." There was a moment of silence then. "He says it concerns your payment, Mr. Blackwood. The £50? Thomas and Charlotte exchanged glances. How could Mrs. Finch know about the £50? He had never mentioned the amount to her. It's not Mrs. Finch anymore. A chill ran down Thomas's spine. He moved to the fireplace, grasping the poker as a makeshift weapon. "I'll come down to speak with him, Mrs. Finch, just a moment." "Tom, no. We need to know what we're dealing with. Stay here. If I'm not back in 5 minutes, leave through the window and go straight to Scotland Yard." Before Charlotte could protest further, Thomas opened the door and stepped into the hallway, the poker concealed behind his back. The corridor was dimly lit by a single gas lamp, casting long shadows across the floral wallpaper. "Mrs. Finch?" There was no response. Thomas moved cautiously toward the stairs, every sense alert. The house was unnaturally quiet. No creaking floorboards, no ticking clocks, no sounds of other lodgers. At the bottom of the stairs stood a figure in evening dress. Even in the poor light, Thomas recognized Marcus's distinctive mismatched eyes. "Mr. Blackwood, I believe we had an appointment this evening. The theater burned down, Marcus. There was nothing to return to. And yet, here I am, with your payment." Marcus held up an envelope, identical to the one he had given Thomas the previous night. £40, as agreed. But first, I'll need the photographs. I don't have them. They were destroyed when my studio was vandalized. Marcus tilted his head slightly, studying Thomas with those unnerving eyes. "Not all of them, I think. The one that matters most. You still have that one. What are you? What was that performance really about?" "The Immortal Mask is exactly what its name suggests, Mr. Blackwood. A ritual of immortality. Every 50 years, we select a worthy audience to witness our performance, usually just one individual, an artist who can capture our essence and distribute it to the world. The other fires, the other theaters. In 1857, it was a painter. In 1807, an engraver. In 1757, a sculptor. Each preserved us in their medium, allowing us to reach beyond the confines of the theater. But photography. Photography is special. So much more immediate, so much more real." Thomas gripped the poker tighter, though he sensed it would be of little use against whatever Marcus truly was. "And the vandalism of my studio? Not our work. There are always competitors, those who would steal our methods, our power. They seek the photographs for their own purposes. The mask hungers." At this, Marcus smiled, a cold expression that never reached his eyes. "Indeed it does. The white mask most of all. Our lead performer requires sustenance, but that need not concern you. Your role is complete, Mr. Blackwood. Simply give me the remaining photograph, accept your payment, and our business is concluded. And if I refuse, that would be unfortunate. For you, for Miss Weber, for poor Mrs. Finch, who was kind enough to let us in." Thomas's blood ran cold at the implied threat. "Where is Mrs. Finch?" "Asleep, dreaming of masks. She'll remember nothing of this encounter, unless, of course, you force me to take more permanent measures." Thomas knew he was trapped. If even half of what Charlotte had told him about the Schattenspieler was true, he and everyone in the house were in grave danger. "Very well. Wait here. I'll fetch the photograph." A wise decision. Thomas ascended the stairs slowly, mind racing. As he reached Charlotte's door, he took a deep breath, trying to compose himself before entering. "Lottie, The room was empty. The window stood open, curtains billowing in the night breeze. Charlotte had fled, just as he had instructed her to do if he didn't return quickly, and she had taken the photograph with her. "A problem, Mr. Blackwood?" Thomas whirled around. Marcus stood in the doorway, his expression unchanged, but his eyes now glittering with a cold fury. "She's gone, and she took the photograph with her. That is inconvenient." Marcus stepped into the room, and as he did, Thomas noticed something alarming. The director's shadow on the wall behind him didn't match his silhouette. Instead, it formed the distinct outline of the white mask from the performance. Where would she go, I wonder? To the police, perhaps? They won't believe her, you know. They never do. What are you going to do? Find her, of course. The photograph must be recovered. The cycle must be completed. Thomas raised the poker, though he knew it was a futile gesture. "I won't let you hurt her, my dear Mr. Blackwood. I'm afraid you have no say in the matter." Marcus reached into his coat and withdrew something white and gleaming. The mask, the same bone-white mask worn by the lid performer, with its blank eyes and subtle smile. "Do you know why we selected you, Mr. Blackwood? Because you have the eye. You see beyond the surface, a valuable trait in a photographer and in a vessel. Stay back. The mask has chosen you, Thomas. It's a great honor. Few are worthy to wear it." As Marcus spoke, Thomas noticed something horrifying. The director's face was becoming less distinct, the features blurring as though they were made of wax and beginning to melt. Beneath the dissolving visage, something else was becoming visible, something that was not a face at all. "Don't be afraid. The transition is momentary, the hunger eternal." In a desperate move, Thomas lunged forward, swinging the poker with all his strength. It connected with Marcus's arm, knocking the mask from his grasp. The white mask clattered to the floor, and in that instant, a high-pitched wailing filled the room, not coming from Marcus, but from the mask itself. Thomas didn't hesitate. He bolted for the door, shouldering past the thing that had been Marcus. In the hallway, he could hear doors opening as other lodgers were awakened by the unearthly sound. "What in God's name is that noise?" Thomas didn't stop to explain. He raced down the stairs and out into the night, his only thought to find Charlotte before Marcus, or whatever Marcus truly was, could reach her. The streets of London were quieter now, the hour approaching midnight. Thomas headed instinctively toward Scotland Yard, assuming that would be Charlotte's destination. But as he ran, a thought struck him. Charlotte was too clever to go directly to the authorities. She would know she was being pursued. She would seek sanctuary first, somewhere to hide until morning. The church, St. Anne's. Charlotte had mentioned once that she often visited St. Anne's Church when she needed peace and quiet. It was only a few streets away from her lodgings, and would be empty at this hour, but possibly unlocked for night prayers. Thomas changed direction, moving through back alleys and side streets. He could sense rather than hear pursuit behind him, a cold presence that seemed to seep through the very stones of the city. St. Anne's came into view, its Gothic spire silhouetted against the night sky. The church was dark, save for a few candles burning in the windows, suggesting it was indeed open. Thomas approached the side door, finding it unlocked as he had hoped. The interior was dimly lit by altar candles and a few gas lamps turned low. The air smelled of incense and old stone. "Charlotte, are you here?" At first there was no response. Then, from the shadows near the altar, a whispered reply. "Tom, is it really you?" "Yes, it's me. Quickly, we need to leave. He's coming." Charlotte emerged from her hiding place, clutching something to her chest. "The photograph. I was right, wasn't I? About the Schattenspieler?" "Yes. God help us, you were right. Marcus, he's not human, Lottie. He tried to make me wear the mask. Said it had chosen me." "The white mask? The lead performer's mask?" "Yes. We need to destroy the photograph. It's our only chance. I've been trying. Look." She held out the photograph. Despite being crumpled and torn, the image remained perfectly intact. The white mask stared out at them, those eyes behind it seeming more alive than ever. "I tried burning it with a candle. The flame wouldn't catch. I tried tearing it to pieces, but the image remains whole no matter how I damage the paper. There must be a way." "In the legend, the only way to stop the Schattenspieler is to—" She never finished her sentence. The church door slammed open, a cold wind extinguishing several of the candles. In the doorway stood a figure, no longer fully resembling Marcus, but not yet something else. The face was a blur of features, constantly shifting and reforming. "The photograph, Miss Weber. Now." Charlotte backed away, still clutching the photograph. "You can't have it. Then I shall take it from your corpse." The figure moved forward with unnatural speed. Thomas placed himself between Charlotte and the approaching horror. "Run, Lottie! The crypt! Hide in the crypt!" Charlotte hesitated only a moment before fleeing toward the back of the church, where a door led down to the ancient crypt beneath. "A futile gesture, Mr. Blackwood. There is nowhere in this city she can hide from us. What happens if the photograph is destroyed?" This seemed to give the creature pause. The cycle would be broken. We would be bound to the theater ashes until the next 50-year conjunction. But it matters not. The photograph cannot be destroyed by ordinary means. "You mean fire? Or tearing?" "The image endures because it has captured our essence. It can only be unmade by the one who made it." Thomas felt a surge of hope. By the creature's own admission, he, as the photographer, had the power to destroy the image. "Then I'll unmake it." "You misunderstand. To unmake the image, you must first become part of it." You must wear the mask. From within his coat, the thing that had been Marcus produced the white mask once more. Accept your destiny, Thomas Blackwood. Become immortal. Thomas backed away, bumping into a row of pews. He glanced around desperately for a weapon, a means of escape. Anything. Why me? Why was I chosen? The mask chooses its wearer. It saw in you a kindred hunger, for recognition, for immortality through your art. Are those not the reasons you became a photographer? To capture moments that would outlive you? The words struck uncomfortably close to the truth. Thomas had always seen photography as a means of creating something lasting, something that would preserve his vision long after he was gone. Take the mask, Thomas. Embrace eternity. For a horrible moment, Thomas felt himself tempted, the promise of immortality, of endless creativity. But then he thought of Charlotte, hiding in the crypt below, of Mrs. Finch and the other lodgers, sleeping in ignorance of the horror that had entered their home, of all the future victims if the cycle continued. No, you have no choice. The mask has chosen. It hungers. The creature lunged forward, pressing the mask toward Thomas's face. In desperation, Thomas grabbed a heavy brass candlestick from a nearby pew and swung it with all his might, striking the creature's arm. The mask flew from its grasp, landing on the stone floor of the church with a sound like cracking bone. Both Thomas and the creature lunged for it simultaneously, but Thomas reached it first. His fingers closed around the smooth, cold surface. Yes, put it on. Complete the cycle. But Thomas had no intention of wearing the mask. Instead, he scrambled to his feet and ran toward the altar, where the church's cross stood tall and imposing. Charlotte, the photograph. Bring it here. From the door to the crypt, Charlotte emerged, still clutching the photograph. She saw Thomas at the altar and ran to him, even as the creature that had been Marcus moved to intercept her. Tom! She threw the photograph. It sailed through the air, over the creature's reaching hands, and Thomas caught it. Now he held both the mask and its image. No! The creature's form was deteriorating rapidly now, the human disguise melting away to reveal something ancient and terrible beneath. A writhing darkness that had only the vaguest suggestion of humanity. Thomas placed the mask face up on the altar, directly beneath the cross. Then he placed the photograph on top of it, aligning the image with the original. As I created you, I unmake you. He seized the heavy church Bible from the altar and slammed it down upon the mask and photograph with all his strength. The mask shattered beneath the impact, fragments of white porcelain scattering across the altar. At the same instant, the photograph burst into flames, burning with an intense blue fire that consumed it in seconds without scorching the altar cloth beneath. The creature that had been Marcus contorted in agony, its form collapsing in on itself like smoke being drawn into an invisible vessel. The unearthly wailing rose to a crescendo, then suddenly ceased. Where the creature had stood, there was nothing but empty air. Is it over? Thomas stared at the fragments of the mask, scattered like broken eggshell across the altar. I think so, but we should make sure. He gathered the fragments of the mask into the church Bible, careful not to touch them directly. Charlotte found a metal box in the vestry used for collecting donations, and they transferred the shards into it, then locked it. What did we do with it? We returned to the Criterion, to the ashes of the theater. Marcus said they would be bound to the ashes if the cycle was broken. Dawn was breaking as they made their way back to Piccadilly Circus, the streets beginning to fill with early workers. The Criterion stood as before, cordoned off but unguarded at this early hour. They slipped past the police tape to the rear of the building, where the fire damage was most severe. Here, this must be where the underground theater was located. A section of the building had collapsed entirely, revealing a charred pit below. Thomas opened the metal box and unceremoniously dumped the fragments of the mask into the ashes. Should we say something? Only goodbye. As the last fragment fell into the ashes, a strange breeze arose, though the air had been perfectly still moments before. It swirled around the fire-damaged pit, stirring the ashes into a brief cyclone before dispersing. When it settled, the fragments of the mask were no longer visible, having been absorbed into the debris. 50 years. What? According to the legend, they're bound for 50 years, until 1957. That's someone else's problem. For now, they're gone. They made their way back to Charlotte's lodgings, exhausted but relieved. Mrs. Finch greeted them with no memory of the previous night's visitation, concerned only about their haggard appearance. Goodness, you two look like you've seen a ghost. Come in and have some breakfast. Nothing seems so terrible after a good cup of tea. Over the following weeks, Thomas rebuilt his photography business with Charlotte's help. The police investigation into the Criterion fire eventually concluded that it had been an elaborate insurance fraud gone wrong, though the missing persons were never found nor identified. Thomas never took another theatrical portrait. His experiences had given him a profound distrust of performers and their masks. Instead, he focused on landscape photography, finding a new passion in capturing the permanent rather than the ephemeral. As for the Schattenspieler, the shadow players, Thomas and Charlotte kept their knowledge to themselves. Who would believe such a tale? And yet, they were careful to keep a record, hidden away for those who might need it 50 years hence. In June of 1957, a small plain envelope arrived at the British Museum. Inside was a weathered photograph showing 8 masked performers on a stage, dated 1907. A note accompanied it: "Beware the white mask. It hungers still." The photograph was catalogued, filed, and eventually digitized as part of the museum's theatrical history collection. There it remained, largely forgotten, until it was rediscovered last month during the digitization of the Criterion Theater archives. 8 actors, 1 photograph, and if you zoom in on the lead one's mask, those eyes seem to follow you, even now. Watching, waiting, hungering. This has been Shadow Frames. Join us next time when we uncover the secrets hidden in another forgotten image.